The beautiful women in his inherited cabin smirked. "You can handle all 5 of us?" The bullet missed Jake Connor's head by 3 inches. He felt the heat of it as he dove behind the water trough, splinters exploding from the wooden post where his skull had been a heartbeat before. 5 men on horseback circled the ranch house, their rifles already smoking. Jake's hand found his revolver. His brother lay dead in the doorway, blood pooling on the porch planks. They had come at dawn, the Garrett gang, 20 strong when they rode into Canyon Ridge 3 days ago. Now only these 5 remained, and they wanted Jake dead before they left. He counted his bullets. 4 left. 5 men. The math was simple and cruel. The youngest Garrett brother, Pete, fired again. The shot punched through the trough, and water began leaking onto the dry dirt. Jake rolled left as another bullet tore up earth where he had been crouching. These men were not playing games. They had burned the town, killed anyone who resisted, and taken everything worth taking. Jake's ranch was the last place standing in Canyon Ridge, the last place they needed to destroy before disappearing into the desert. A rider broke from the circle, charging straight at him. Jake rose and fired. The man jerked backward in his saddle but did not fall. He fired again. This time the rider tumbled, his horse galloping away into the scrub. 3 bullets. 4 men. The others had stopped circling. They spread out, dismounting, using their horses as cover. Smart. Jake cursed under his breath. The sun was climbing, already baking the ground. His canteen was in the house. His brother's body lay between him and the door. Someone laughed. Dutch Garrett, the leader, stood behind his horse with a rifle rested across the saddle. He was grinning, and Jake could see it even from 30 yards away. "You got 2 choices, Connor," Dutch called out. "Die quick or die slow. We got all day." Jake did not answer. He was calculating distances, angles, chances. The well was 15 feet to his right. The barn was 40 feet to his left, full of hay that would burn fast if they got a torch to it. The fence line was his only real option, 50 feet behind him, but it offered no cover worth mention. A shot rang out, and another piece of the trough exploded. They were toying with him now, making him sweat. Jake wiped his forehead. His hand came away red. He had not even felt the cut. A splinter must have got him. He looked at his brother's body again, at the dust settling over Canyon Ridge, at the empty buildings where neighbors had lived before the Garrett gang arrived. He checked his revolver one more time. 3 bullets, 4 men, he would make them count. Jake made his decision in half a second. He burst from behind the trough and ran for the barn. 2 shots cracked behind him. One hit the ground near his feet, the other whistled past his ear. He dove through the barn door and rolled, coming up in a crouch behind a hay bale. "Burn it!" Dutch shouted. Jake swore. He had maybe 2 minutes before this whole place was an inferno. He moved deeper into the barn, toward the back wall where his brother had stored the winter supplies. His boots found the loose board without looking. He pulled it up. The cache was there. A Winchester rifle with a full magazine, 2 boxes of ammunition. A knife with a 7-inch blade. He grabbed them all and climbed the ladder to the loft. From up here he could see through the gaps in the boards. One of the Garrett men was approaching the barn with a torch. Behind him, another covered with a rifle. Pete Garrett was circling around to the side door. Dutch was still by the horses, watching. Jake aimed through a gap and fired. The man with the torch dropped and the flames caught on his shirt. He screamed and rolled in the dirt. The rifleman spun and fired blindly at the barn. Jake moved positions as bullets punched through the old wood. He found another gap and fired again. The rifleman stumbled but did not fall. Jake fired a 3rd time. The man went down. 2 bullets left in his revolver. 2 men down. 3 still standing. The fire from the dropped torch was spreading to the barn wall. Smoke was already curling up through the loft. Jake grabbed the Winchester and moved to the far end, away from the flames. He could see Pete through a gap, creeping toward the side door. Jake aimed carefully and squeezed the trigger. Pete's hat flew off. The young Garrett dove behind a fence post, and Jake lost sight of him. The smoke was getting thicker. Jake climbed down from the loft and moved toward the back of the barn. There was an old loading door that faced the canyon, not the ranch yard. His brother had used it for moving hay bales. Jake kicked it open and looked out. The drop was steep but not impossible. Below, the canyon floor was rocky and offered dozens of places to hide. If he could get down there, he could turn this whole fight around. Make them come to him on ground he knew. He heard voices shouting in the yard. They knew he had gone quiet. They would be coming soon. Jake slung the Winchester over his shoulder and climbed out onto the narrow ledge. The canyon wall was rough sandstone, weathered and cracked. He found handholds and started down, moving fast but careful. A fall from here would break both legs. Maybe his back. He was halfway down when Pete appeared at the loading door above. The young Garrett saw him and raised his rifle. Jake let go with one hand, drew his revolver, and fired. The shot went wide. Pete ducked back inside. Jake holstered the gun and kept climbing. His boots hit the canyon floor just as Pete reappeared and started shooting. Bullets ricocheted off rocks. Jake ran, weaving between boulders the size of horses. A bullet clipped his shoulder, spinning him around. He caught himself on a rock and kept moving. His arm was on fire, but he could still use it. The canyon twisted and narrowed. Jake knew these passages. He had explored them as a kid with his brother. There were places where a man could vanish, where horses could not follow, where the stone walls rose straight up for 100 feet. He reached a crevice and slipped inside. It was barely wider than his shoulders. He pushed deeper, his back scraping against the stone. The passage opened into a small chamber, dim and cool. He stopped to catch his breath and check his shoulder. The bullet had torn through the meat of his upper arm, but missed the bone. He ripped a strip from his shirt and tied it tight. Outside, he heard voices echoing off the canyon walls. They were coming down, at least 2 of them, maybe all 3. Jake checked the Winchester. He had 15 rounds. He checked his revolver. 1 bullet left. He had left his brother's gun at the ranch. Stupid. But there was no going back now. He moved to the far end of the chamber where another crack led deeper into the canyon system. He could hear them getting closer, their boots crunching on gravel, their voices low and cautious. They knew he was near. Jake positioned himself in the shadows and waited. The first man appeared at the entrance to the chamber. It was Pete. The kid was breathing hard, his rifle sweeping the space. Jake let him take 3 steps inside. Then he spoke. "Drop it." Pete froze. His eyes found Jake in the shadows. "I said drop it." The rifle hit the ground. Pete raised his hands. He was maybe 19, 20 years old. His face was pale under the dirt and sweat. "Where's Dutch?" Jake asked. "Right behind me." Liar. "Dutch would never let you lead. Who's with you?" "Just me. I came down alone." Jake believed him. The kid was scared enough to tell the truth. He stepped forward, keeping the Winchester level. "Your brother killed mine," Jake said. "I know. You helped burn the town." "I know. You got anything to say?" Pete swallowed hard. His hands were shaking. "I did not want to. Dutch made me. He makes all of us do things." "That's not good enough." Jake saw the kid's eyes flick to something behind him. He spun, but too late. A gunshot cracked in the tight space, deafening. Jake felt something slam into his ribs.
He fired the Winchester without aiming. Someone screamed.
Jake went to one knee, his side burning. He looked up and saw Dutch Garrett stumbling backward, blood spreading across his chest. The gang leader fell and did not move. Pete was running. Jake tried to raise the rifle, but his arms would not work right. He heard the kid scrambling up the canyon wall, heard rocks falling, heard the sound fading away. Jake leaned against the wall and slid down. His hand found the wound in his side. It was bad. Real bad. He could feel his heartbeat pushing blood out between his fingers. He looked at Dutch's body. At least he had got one of them. Maybe Pete would tell people what happened here. Maybe not. Jake did not care anymore. He closed his eyes and thought about his brother. About the ranch. About Canyon Ridge before the Garretts came. His breathing was getting shallow. The darkness was closing in. He hoped Pete kept running. Hoped the kid never came back. Jake woke to the sound of water dripping. His eyes opened to darkness so complete he thought for a moment he was dead. Then pain flooded through him, sharp and bright, and he knew he was alive. Dead men did not hurt this much. He tried to move and gasped. His ribs felt like they were full of broken glass. His side was sticky with dried blood. How long had he been out? Hours? Days? He had no way to tell in this black void. His hand found the Winchester lying beside him. Still there. He felt around for Dutch's body. It was gone. His heart jumped. Then he understood. Pete must have come back. The kid had dragged his brother's corpse out of the canyon. Jake forced himself to sit up. Stars exploded behind his eyes. He waited for the wave of nausea to pass, then felt along the wall until he found the crevice that led back to the main canyon. He crawled through it inch by inch, biting back groans with each movement. The passage opened onto the canyon floor. Daylight hit him like a fist. He shielded his eyes and looked up at the sky. Late afternoon sun, judging by the angle. He had been unconscious for most of the day, maybe longer. His throat was dust. He needed water. The creek that ran through the bottom of the canyon was 100 yards away. He stood, swayed, caught himself against the rock wall. The Winchester felt like it weighed 100 pounds, but he kept it with him. He started walking. Each step was an exercise in willpower. His vision kept blurring. Twice he had to stop and lean against boulders until the world stopped spinning. But he made it to the creek and fell to his knees in the shallow water. He drank until his stomach ached, then splashed water on his face and neck. He pulled up his shirt to examine the wound. The bullet had entered just below his rib cage on the right side and exited out the back, clean through. Lucky. If it had gone an inch to the left, it would have torn through his liver and he would already be dead. The bleeding had mostly stopped, but the wound was ugly. It needed cleaning and stitching. It needed a doctor. Jake laughed at that thought. The nearest doctor was 3 towns away, and he could barely walk. He tore more strips from his shirt and used the creek water to wash the wound as best he could. He packed it with cloth and tied it tight. It would have to do. He heard horses in the distance. His head snapped up. They were coming from the direction of the ranch. Multiple riders. Jake grabbed the Winchester and moved into the rocks beside the creek. He found a spot with good cover and waited. 4 riders appeared at the mouth of the canyon. Not the Garretts. These men wore badges. A marshal and 3 deputies. Jake lowered the rifle but kept it close. He watched them ride down the canyon until they were near the creek. Then he stepped out. The marshal's hand went to his gun. Jake raised his free hand.
Easy. I am Jake Cotter.
This is my land. The marshal relaxed slightly but did not smile. He was a big man with gray hair and tired eyes. The deputies spread out, hands on their weapons. You Connor? The marshal asked. I am. We got word Canyon Ridge was hit. Came as fast as we could. Found a lot of bodies. Found a kid named Pete Garrett at the edge of town. He told us a story about you and his brothers. Where is Pete now? In our custody. He is talking plenty, trying to save his own neck. Says you killed Dutch Garrett in self-defense. Says the gang burned the town, killed your brother. That true? Jake nodded.
All true.
Where are the other 2? The gang had 5 men left when I saw them this morning. We found 2 dead at your ranch. 1 with a torch, 1 with a rifle. That leaves Pete and 1 more unaccounted for. Danny Garrett, Dutch's cousin. He was with them at the ranch. I lost track of him during the fight. The marshal dismounted and walked closer. He looked at the blood on Jake's shirt, at the makeshift bandage, at the hollow look in his eyes. You need medical attention, the marshal said. I need to find Danny Garrett. Let us handle it. You have done enough. This is my town, what is left of it. I will handle it. The marshal studied him for a long moment. Then he nodded. I understand. But you are coming with us first. We got a camp set up at the edge of town. My deputy used to be an army medic. He'll patch you up proper. Then we will hunt Danny Garrett together. Deal? Jake wanted to argue. Wanted to get on a horse right now and track the last Garrett down before he disappeared into the desert. But his body was screaming at him. His legs felt like they would give out any second. He needed help, and he was out of pride. Deal, he said. They rode double back to Canyon Ridge. Jake sat behind one of the deputies, gritting his teeth as the horse's movements jostled his wound. When they reached the town, he saw the full extent of the destruction. The general store was ash. The saloon was a burned-out shell. Bodies were laid out in a row near the church, covered with blankets. His brother was among them. The marshal's camp was on the north side of town, away from the ruins. They had tents and supplies. The medic was a young man named Carl who had gentle hands and a steady voice. He cleaned Jake's wound with whiskey that burned worse than the bullet, then stitched it closed with practiced efficiency. You were lucky, Carl said. Another inch and you would have bled out before anyone found you. I have heard that before, Jake said. Carl wrapped the wound in clean bandages and gave Jake a bottle of laudanum for the pain. Jake took 2 swallows and felt the world soften at the edges, not enough to dull his mind, just enough to take the worst edge off. The marshal came into the tent carrying 2 tin cups of coffee. He handed one to Jake and sat down on a supply crate. Pete gave us a full confession, the marshal said. Names, dates, crimes. The Garrett gang has been operating for 2 years. They hit 9 towns between here and the border. Killed maybe 40 people, stole thousands in gold and cash. What happens to Pete? He will stand trial. Probably hang, given what he admitted to. But he gave us enough information to close a lot of cases. That counts for something. And Danny? Pete says Danny headed east into the mountains. Says he has a hideout up there, a cabin no one knows about. Pete drew us a map. Jake set down his coffee. I am going after him. Not tonight, you are not. You can barely stand.
Rest. Heal.
"We will ride out at first light." Jake wanted to argue again, but the laudanum was pulling him down, and his body was shutting down whether he liked it or not. He lay back on the cot and closed his eyes. The last thing he heard before sleep took him was the marshal's voice, low and thoughtful. "You are one tough son of a gun, Connor. Canyon Ridge is lucky to have you." Jake was not sure about that. Everyone he knew was dead. The town was destroyed, and there was still one Garrett left to kill. Luck had nothing to do with any of it. They rode out at dawn. Jake sat his own horse now, borrowed from the marshal's stock. The animal was a solid bay gelding with good legs and a calm temperament. Jake's wound throbbed with each step, but the laudanum kept it manageable. The marshal rode beside him, with Carl and 2 deputies following behind. The map Pete had drawn led them into the foothills east of Canyon Ridge. The terrain changed quickly from desert scrub to pine forest. The air grew cooler. Jake could smell snow on the high peaks above them. Winter was coming early this year. They followed a narrow trail that wound between rock formations and deadfall. The marshal kept his rifle across his saddle, eyes scanning the trees. Everyone was tense. Danny Garrett was cornered now, which made him more dangerous than ever. Around midday, they stopped at a stream to water the horses. Carl checked Jake's bandages and nodded approval. The wound was not bleeding. Jake took more laudanum and chewed on some jerky from his saddlebag. "How much further?" the marshal asked. Jake looked at the map. "Another 2 hours, maybe 3. The cabin is supposed to be in a valley on the far side of that ridge." He pointed to a steep rise covered in thick pines. "We should split up," one of the deputies said. His name was Frank, and he had a nervous way of touching his gun every few minutes. "Come at it from 2 sides." The marshal shook his head. "Bad idea." "We stay together. Danny knows this country." "We do not. Splitting up is how people get killed." They mounted up and continued. The trail grew steeper. The horses labored, their breath coming hard in the thin air. Jake's wound was a constant burn now, but he pushed the pain down and focused on the task ahead. One more, Garrett. One more fight. Then maybe he could rest. They crested the ridge as the sun touched the horizon. Below them, in a narrow valley surrounded by cliffs, was a small cabin. Smoke rose from the chimney. A single horse grazed in a makeshift corral. "That is it," Jake said. The marshal studied the valley. "Only one way in or out unless you can climb those cliffs. If he runs, we got him. If he fights, we got good cover." "He will fight," Jake said. "Garretts do not run. Pete ran. Pete was scared. Danny is not." They dismounted and tied the horses in a grove of trees. The marshal checked his rifle, and the deputies did the same. Carl stayed with the horses, his hand on his revolver. He was no fighter, but he would do his part if it came to it. Jake led the way down the slope. They moved slowly, using the trees for cover. When they were 100 yards from the cabin, the marshal raised his hand and they stopped. The light was fading fast. Soon it would be dark. "Danny Garrett," the marshal called out. "This is U.S. Marshal Henry Walsh. You are surrounded. Come out with your hands up." Silence. Smoke continued to rise from the chimney. The horse in the corral lifted its head but did not spook. "Garrett, this is your last chance." A gunshot answered. The bullet hit a tree 6 inches from the marshal's head. Everyone dropped to the ground. Another shot followed, then another. Danny was firing blind, trying to keep them pinned. Jake crawled to a fallen log and peered over it. He could see movement in the cabin window. A shadow passed across the dim interior light. He raised his Winchester and waited for a clear shot. The deputies were returning fire now, their rifles cracking in the mountain air. Wood splinters flew from the cabin walls. A window shattered. The marshal moved to the right, trying to flank the cabin. Danny saw him and fired 3 quick shots. The marshal dove behind a boulder. Jake saw his chance. While Danny was focused on the marshal, Jake raised up and aimed at the window. He squeezed the trigger. The shadow in the window jerked and disappeared. Had he hit him? There was no way to know. The cabin went quiet. No more shots. No more movement. The only sound was the wind in the pines and the nervous stamp of the horse in the corral. "Garrett," the marshal called again. "You hit?" No answer. "Could be a trick," Frank said. "Could be waiting for us to come closer." Jake did not think so. That shot had felt solid. He had seen the shadow react. But Frank was right to be cautious. Danny Garrett was not the kind of man to give up easy.
They waited as darkness fell.
The temperature dropped. Jake's breath misted in the air. His wound was stiffening up, and he knew if he stayed still much longer he would not be able to move well. They needed to end this. "I'm going in," Jake said. "The hell you are," the marshal said. "You can barely walk, which is why I am the best choice. If he is waiting, he will shoot whoever comes through that door. Better me than one of your men." "That is not how this works, Connor. This is my fight. Has been from the start." "I am going." Jake stood before the marshal could stop him. His wound screamed in protest, but he ignored it. He walked toward the cabin, his rifle ready, his finger on the trigger. Every step felt like it might be his last. He was a perfect target in the open ground between the trees and the cabin. No shots came. He reached the door and pressed himself against the wall beside it. He could hear nothing from inside. He kicked the door open and swung the rifle through the opening. Danny Garrett was slumped against the far wall, his shirt dark with blood. His rifle lay on the floor beside him. His eyes were open, fixed on the ceiling. Jake approached carefully, his rifle never wavering. He kicked Danny's gun away and checked for a pulse. Nothing. Jake lowered his rifle and leaned against the wall. He was breathing hard, and his vision was blurring again. He had got them all. Dutch. The two at the ranch. And now Danny. The Garrett gang was finished. The marshal and his deputies entered the cabin. The marshal looked at Danny's body, then at Jake. "It is over," the marshal said. Jake nodded. "It is over." They carried Danny's body outside and tied it to his horse. They would take him back to Canyon Ridge and bury him with his brothers in the patch of ground set aside for outlaws and criminals. Pete would be there eventually, too, after the trial and the hanging. Jake climbed back onto his borrowed horse. His wound was bleeding again. He could feel it soaking through the bandages. Carl noticed and moved his horse closer. "You need to rest," Carl said. "That wound is going to kill you if you do not take it easy." "I will rest when we get back," Jake said. They rode through the night, following the trail by moonlight. Jake drifted in and out of consciousness, holding onto the saddle horn with both hands. He dreamed of his brother, of Canyon Ridge before the fire, of a life that was gone and never coming back. When they reached the town at dawn, he slid off his horse and collapsed. Carl caught him and lowered him gently to the ground. The last thing Jake saw before everything went black was the ruins of his town, stark and broken against the rising sun. Jake woke 3 days later in a bed that was not his own. The room was small and clean, with white curtains on the window and a smell of soap and medicine. He turned his head and saw Carl sitting in a chair beside the bed, reading a book. "Welcome back," Carl said. "We thought we might lose you for a while there." Jake tried to sit up. Pain lanced through his side, but it was different now. Sharper but cleaner, not the deep burning that had been there before. "Easy," Carl said. "You tore the stitches twice already. Third time, I might just let you bleed." Jake settled back against the pillows. His mouth was dry. Carl poured water from a pitcher and held the cup while Jake drank. "Where am I?" "A boarding house. Only building in town that did not burn. Mrs. Palmer has been letting us use the upstairs rooms." "How long?" 3 days. "You had a fever. Infection from the wound." "I cleaned it out best I could, but you were touch and go for a while." 3 days. He felt like he had been asleep for a year. His body was weak, his mind foggy, but he was alive. That was something. "The marshal?" he asked. "Headed back to his territory yesterday. Left Frank behind to keep an eye on things. Pete Garrett went with them. He will stand trial in the county seat."
And the town? Carl set down his book and looked out the window. People are starting to come back.
"Not many, but some." Mrs. Palmer never left. Old Henry Grant came back 2 days ago with his son. They are already clearing away the burned buildings, talking about rebuilding. Jake thought about that. Rebuilding. Starting over. It seemed impossible. The town was dead. His brother was dead. Everyone he knew was gone. What was there to rebuild? "You are thinking it is not worth it," Carl said, reading his expression. "I can see it on your face. Can you blame me?" "No, but I think you are wrong." Jake looked at him. Carl was young, maybe 25. He had kind eyes and steady hands. The kind of man who would make a good doctor someday. "Why?" Jake asked. "Because this place matters, not the buildings. Not even the people who died, but the idea of it. Canyon Ridge was a place where folks could make a life, where they could work hard and raise families and feel safe. The Garretts took that away for a while, but they are gone now." "You made sure of that. And as long as people like you are willing to stand up, places like this can survive." Jake wanted to argue. wanted to tell Carl he was naive and idealistic and did not understand how the world really worked. But he was too tired, and maybe, somewhere deep down, he wanted to believe Carl was right.
A knock came at the door.
Mrs. Palmer entered carrying a tray of food. She was a stout woman in her 50s with gray hair pulled back in a bun. She had eyes that had seen plenty of hard times but had not lost their warmth. "About time you woke up," she said, setting the tray on the table beside the bed. "I was starting to think Carl here was going to eat all my soup himself." "It is good soup," Carl said, grinning. Palmer swatted his shoulder and turned to Jake. "How are you feeling?" "Like I got shot." "Well, you did." "So I suppose that is accurate." She poured more water and handed him the cup. "You need to eat. Build your strength back up." Jake sipped the soup. It was chicken broth with vegetables, hot and salty, and better than anything he had tasted in weeks. He ate slowly, feeling warmth spread through his chest. Mrs. Palmer watched him with the careful attention of someone who had nursed plenty of people back to health. "Your brother," she said quietly. "We buried him proper, near the church, with the others. I hope that is all right." Jake nodded. He did not trust himself to speak. "He was a good man. They all were. Canyon Ridge will remember them." She squeezed his hand and left. Carl helped Jake finish the soup, then changed his bandages. The wound was healing, slowly but surely. In a few more days, Jake would be able to walk without help. In a few more weeks, he might be back to normal. Or at least what passed for normal after everything that had happened. That afternoon, Frank stopped by to check on him. The deputy was carrying a bundle wrapped in canvas. He set it on the bed. "Found this at your ranch," Frank said. "Thought you might want it." Jake unwrapped the canvas. Inside was his brother's gun belt and revolver. The leather was scorched and the metal was tarnished, but it was intact. Jake held the gun, feeling its weight, remembering his brother wearing it every day of his life. "Thank you," he said. Frank nodded. "Marshall wanted me to tell you something. He said if you ever need work, there is always a place for a man like you in the territory. Deputies are in short supply. Good deputies, anyway." Jake thought about that. A deputy marshal. Riding from town to town, keeping the peace, hunting outlaws. It was not a bad life. Not safe, but nothing worth doing ever was. "Tell him I will think about it," Jake said. Frank left, and Jake was alone with his thoughts. He looked out the window at the ruins of Canyon Ridge, at the people moving through the streets, clearing debris, salvaging what they could, at the sun setting behind the canyon walls, painting everything gold and red. He thought about his brother, about the ranch, about the life they had built together. It was gone now, all of it. But Carl was right. The idea of it remained. The idea that a man could stand up when others ran. That a town could rebuild after it burned. That even in the darkest times, there was still hope. Jake set his brother's gun on the table beside the bed. He would wear it tomorrow. He would walk through the town and see what needed doing. He would help rebuild, if they wanted his help. And when Canyon Ridge was strong again, maybe then he would think about the marshal's offer. About riding out into the territory and making sure other towns did not suffer the same fate. But that was tomorrow. Tonight he would rest. Tonight he would heal. Tonight he would remember. He closed his eyes and let sleep take him. In his dreams, his brother was alive. The ranch was whole. The Garretts had never come. And Canyon Ridge stood proud against the desert sun, a place where people could live and work and feel safe. A place worth fighting for. A place worth dying for. A place worth living for. The end.